Have you ever wondered what you'd do if you discovered your fiancé was sleeping with your own mother the night before your wedding? What if I told you I found out 24 hours before walking down the aisle, and instead of canceling everything, I decided to give 200 wedding guests the most unforgettable ceremony of their lives? This is the true story of how I turned my wedding day into the ultimate revenge, and why sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose yourself when everyone expects you to stay silent. I stood at the altar of Sacred Heart Cathedral, my hands trembling against the Italian silk of my custom Vera Wang wedding dress, watching 200 of Los Angeles' elites stare back at me with expectant smiles. The morning California sun streamed through those magnificent stained glass windows, casting rainbow shadows across the imported marble floors, while a full orchestra filled the cathedral with Pachelbel's canon. But my heart wasn't racing with bridal joy. It was hammering with the terrible, crushing knowledge that would shatter everything in the next few minutes. Behind the sea of Cartier-wearing, Tesla-driving guests, I could see my mother Victoria in the front pew, resplendent in her emerald Chanel dress, her face glowing with what everyone believed was maternal pride. 24 hours ago, I would have believed that radiant smile meant she was the happiest mother in Beverly Hills, watching her daughter marry into one of California's most powerful legal dynasties. But now I knew the truth about Victoria Sterling's happiness. It wasn't about my wedding day at all. Alexander squeezed my hand, his piercing blue eyes warm with what I had once believed was pure devotion. That same confidence that had first captivated me when we met at a charity gala 3 years ago. His voice carried that familiar Beverly Hills charm when he whispered, "You ready for this, Madison?" I looked into his face, that sharp jawline I'd traced with my fingers during countless passionate nights, the mouth that had whispered promises of forever while we made love in his penthouse overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The face that belonged to a man who'd been sleeping with my mother for months while planning our wedding. "Oh, I'm ready," I whispered back, my voice steady despite the earthquake of betrayal happening in my chest. More ready than you could possibly imagine. 3 months earlier, I had been blissfully, foolishly happy, living what everyone in our social circle considered the perfect Los Angeles dream. My name is Madison Harper Sterling, and at 28, I believed I had everything a woman could want in this city of angels and broken dreams. I was the daughter my parents had always envisioned. Graduated summa cum laude from Stanford with a degree in literature, worked as senior editor at Sterling Literary House, yes, my family's publishing empire, and had just gotten engaged to Alexander Chase Montgomery, the golden boy of Beverly Hills legal society. Our engagement had been the kind of fairy tale that made the society pages of the Los Angeles Times and had Beverly Hills wives calling their daughters with renewed hope for advantageous marriages. Alexander, 31 and devastatingly handsome. In that old money California way, was the son of Supreme Court Justice Theodore Montgomery and philanthropist Eleanor Montgomery, a woman who'd graced the cover of Town and Country more times than I could count. He worked as the youngest partner at Montgomery, Sterling & Associates, drove a midnight blue Lamborghini Huracan, and had proposed to me at the Walt Disney Concert Hall during intermission of Swan Lake, my favorite ballet, with an $84 $500 Tiffany ring that caught the light like captured starfire. "You're going to have such a beautiful life together," my mother Victoria had gushed that magical night, admiring the flawless diamond that seemed to hold all the promise of our future. "The Montgomerys are California royalty, darling. You've done exceptionally well." I should have caught the way she said it, the emphasis on done well rather than found love, as if I'd completed some elaborate business transaction rather than found my soulmate, rather than discovered the man I wanted to build a life with in this sprawling city of dreams. My father, Reverend James Sterling, had been more reserved but equally pleased, his distinguished silver hair catching the light as he smiled with genuine warmth. He'd built his reputation on family values and traditional morals at one of Beverly Hills' most prestigious churches, and seeing his only daughter marry into such a respected family felt like divine confirmation of everything he'd preached for. 30 years of ministry. Alexander is a good man, Dad had said that night, pulling me into one of his warm, enveloping hugs that smelled of expensive cologne and unconditional love. I can see how much he loves you, Madison. And more importantly, I can see how much you love him. Love. The word that would later taste like poison mixed with champagne on my tongue. The emotion that had made me blind to the elaborate deception being woven around me like a spider's web. The wedding planning had consumed the next 2 months, with the intensity of a full-scale military operation, and my mother threw herself into the preparations with an energy that both touched and overwhelmed me. She insisted on handling every single detail: the imported French flowers, the 5-star catering from Spago, the orchestra flown in from Vienna, even my dress fitting, and they always were, I'm sure, he said, stopping to frame my face with his hands, just like in the romantic movies. Just like you're perfect, Madison. I should have wondered why he spent so much time talking about my mother during our romantic walks. I should have questioned the way his eyes would linger on Victoria when she laughed, or how he always seemed to know exactly what wine to bring that would make her face light up with delight. I should have noticed how he'd developed an encyclopedic knowledge of her favorite restaurants, her preferred flowers, her taste in everything from art to literature. But I was drowning in love. And love, I was beginning to understand, has a way of making even the most intelligent women spectacularly blind to what's happening right in front of them. The first crack in my perfect world appeared 3 weeks before the wedding, like a hairline fracture in expensive crystal that would eventually shatter everything. I had stopped by our family mansion after a particularly intense day at Sterling. Literary house, my arms full of RSVP cards and my laptop bag heavy with manuscripts that needed editing before our honeymoon in the Maldives. The house was unusually quiet when I let myself in through the front door, my heels clicking against the imported Italian marble in our grand foyer. "Mom? Dad?" I called, setting my bags down near the sweeping staircase that curved up to the second floor like something from a Hollywood movie set. "In the kitchen, sweetheart," came my mother's voice. But there was something different about it. Breathless, almost flustered, like she'd been running or something else entirely. I found her standing at our enormous kitchen island, her back, to me, washing dishes in our professional-grade sink with an intensity that seemed excessive for our usually spotless kitchen. Her perfectly styled dark hair was mussed, and when she turned around, her cheeks were flushed that particular shade of pink I'd only seen after her intense Pilates sessions at the country club. "Oh, Madison, honey, I didn't expect you so early," she said, avoiding my eyes while drying her hands on one of our monogrammed dish towels. "It's 6:30, I said, checking my Cartier watch, the graduation gift from my parents. "Same time I always come on Wednesdays for wedding planning." Of course, she said, that nervous laugh escaping her lips. "Your father's at the church board meeting, discussing the new community outreach program." Something felt wrong, but I couldn't identify what exactly had set off my internal alarm system. The kitchen smelled different, not like my mother's usual Jo Malone candles, but like something else, something masculine and expensive that reminded me of. "Was someone here?" I asked, settling at our kitchen island with the stack of RSVP cards trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping up my spine. "What? Oh, no, just me," she said, turning back to the sink with unnecessary intensity. "How was your day at the office, darling?" I almost let it go, almost dismissed the nagging feeling as pre-wedding stress playing tricks on my mind. But then, I noticed something on our marble countertop that made my blood run cold. A coffee mug from our Royal Crown Derby china set, the one we only used for the most special occasions and distinguished guests. "Mom, whose mug is this?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral even as my heart began to race. Her shoulders tensed like she'd been struck by lightning. "Mine, of course," she said without turning around. "You only drink Earl Grey tea in the evenings," I said slowly, my mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to consider. I was feeling tired, needed the caffeine boost," she replied, but her voice had that tremor it got when she was lying, the same tremor from when I was 16, and caught her hiding my report card with the B+ in calculus. The lie hung between us like toxic smoke, and suddenly I could smell it clearly. The expensive cologne that wasn't my father's, the scent that reminded me so much of Alexander. The confrontation I should have had that night never came because I loved her, because I trusted her, because the alternative was too horrible to consider. So I chose to believe her obvious lie, packed away my suspicions like wedding gifts I wasn't ready to unwrap, and tried to focus on the RSVP cards and seating, arrangements for what I still believed would be the happiest day of my life. The evening proceeded with surface normalcy, but something fundamental had Alexander, I called again, my voice echoing off the polished concrete floors of his penthouse. I tried his bedroom door, but it was locked, which was strange because Alexander never locked his bedroom door, not even when he was changing clothes or taking business calls. In 3 years together, that door had never been locked, not once. "I'm here," his voice came through the wood, muffled and strange, lacking the warmth that usually flooded his tone when he heard my voice. I'm not feeling well, Madison. Food poisoning, I think." The excuse was so unlike him that it might as well have been delivered in a foreign language. In 3 years together, Alexander had never refused to let me take care of him when he was sick, never turned down my offers to bring soup or medicine or simply hold him while he felt miserable. He was the type of man who wanted to be pampered when he had so much as a headache, who called me at work when he had a mild cold just to hear my voice promising to come over with chicken soup. "Let me take care of you," I said to the locked door, my hand resting against the wood that seemed to pulse with secrets. "No, no," he said, his voice coming through the door with an edge of panic that I'd never heard before. "I don't want you to catch anything. I'll call you tomorrow, I promise." The words came a beat too late, delivered with the kind of careful rehearsal that spoke of lies rather than illness. I stood there for a long moment, staring at that locked door while my mind processed the wine glass with unfamiliar lipstick, the locked bedroom, the panic in his voice, and the growing certainty that my world was built on foundations of sand. "Feel better," I whispered to the door, my voice barely audible. "I love you." "Love you too," came the reply, but the words felt hollow, echoing with the emptiness of performance rather than truth. The truth has a way of revealing itself like water finding cracks in a dam, and 2 days before my wedding, it came flooding through with enough force to drown everything I thought I knew about my life. I was at Sterling Literary House, trying to focus on a manuscript about Renaissance poetry, when my phone rang. My mother's perfectly manicured face appearing on the caller ID like a beautiful mask hiding something terrible. "Madison, darling, I need a favor." Victoria's voice was bright and cheerful, the same tone she used for charity luncheons and society gatherings. "Of course, Mom. What's wrong?" "I left some wedding programs in my car, and I'm having lunch with Mrs. Chen from the floral committee at the country club. Could you swing by the house and grab them? They're in my Mercedes in a manila envelope on the passenger seat." "Sure, no problem," I said, already gathering my purse and car keys, grateful for an excuse to leave the office where I'd been staring at the same page for an hour without reading a single word. The drive to our Bel Air mansion took 20 minutes. Through the legendary Los Angeles traffic, past the palm trees and mansion gates that had defined my privileged childhood. I used my key to get through our private security gate and parked behind my mother's pearl-white Mercedes-Benz S-Class in our circular driveway. The car was unlocked, typical for our exclusive neighborhood where the biggest crime was parking in someone else's assigned spot at the country club. I opened the passenger door and immediately saw the manila envelope, but as I reached for it, something else caught my eye like a snake hiding in paradise. A small black leather Hermes notebook had slipped between the seats, expensive and elegant, like everything my mother owned. That's when the tears finally came, hot, angry tears that tasted like salt and betrayal and the death of innocence. I cried until my chest ached, until my designer mascara ran in dark streams down my cheeks. until there was nothing left inside. Me but cold, crystalline clarity. They had chosen each other over me, had made me complicit in my own humiliation, had planned to continue their affair after my wedding while I played the happy wife. Now I would choose myself over both of them, and I would do it in a way that would ensure the entire city of angels witnessed their fall from grace. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into the Beverly Hills hotel under a false name, paying cash and spinning a story about surprising my husband for our anniversary. The lie came easily. Apparently, I was learning to be as good at deception as my mother and fiancé. In my hotel room, I spread everything out on the king-sized bed like a detective organizing evidence. My mother's journal. Screenshots of Alexander's recent credit card statements showing expensive gifts I'd never received, restaurant reservations at places we'd never been together, and a growing list of all the signs I'd missed. I ordered room service. Overpriced. Champagne and caviar, because if I was going to plan the destruction of 2 lives, I might as well do it in style, and sat cross-legged on the bed, eating while I orchestrated their downfall with the precision of a military campaign. The old Madison would have confronted them privately, would have cried and demanded explanations, and probably would have ended up being manipulated into forgiveness. The old Madison believed in second chances and the power of love to overcome. Anything believed that family was sacred and that some bonds were unbreakable. But the old Madison was dead, burned to ash in the front seat of a Mercedes-Benz while reading her mother's love letters to her fiancé. The new Madison understood that some betrayals were too profound for private resolution, too spectacular for quiet forgiveness. They wanted to play games with my heart? Fine. I'd learned from the best, and tomorrow I would teach them both what it felt like to have their lives destroyed in front of everyone they'd ever wanted to impress. I called my assistant at Sterling Literary House first. Jenna, I need you to do me a favor. Can you compile a guest list for everyone who's coming to my wedding tomorrow? Email addresses, phone numbers, social media handles, everything we have on file. Of course, Madison. Is everything okay? You sound different. Everything's perfect, I said, and for the first time in days, I meant it. I just want to make sure everyone has all the information they need for tomorrow's ceremony. Next, I called my college roommate Priya, who worked as a freelance journalist for several major publications in New York. Madison, oh my God, your wedding is tomorrow. Are you freaking out? I'm so excited to see you become Mrs. Montgomery. Priya, I need a favor. And I need you not to ask questions until after tomorrow. My voice grew serious. What kind of favor? Her tone became cautious, picking up on something in my voice that she'd never heard before. I need you to be at Sacred Heart Cathedral tomorrow with your camera and your press credentials. Something newsworthy is going to happen, and I want it documented properly. Something that needs to be seen and remembered. Madison, you're scaring me. What are you planning? I'm not the one who should be scared, I said, thinking of my mother's journal entries and Alexander's lies. Just trust me on this. I drove to Sacred Heart Cathedral slowly, taking the long way through downtown Los Angeles, past the palm trees and billboards that had defined my entire life in this city of dreams and broken promises. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect. Wedding weather, as everyone would say. The cathedral looked magnificent in the morning light, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like prayers made of stone and steel. Cars were already arriving in the parking lot, early guests, vendors, family members getting ready for what they thought would be a celebration of love and commitment. I parked behind the cathedral and sat for a moment, watching people I'd known my entire life bustle around in preparation for my special day. Mrs. Chen from the floral committee, Mr. Rodriguez, who'd been our neighbor for 20 years, Alexander's law school friends laughing and adjusting their designer ties, all these people who cared about me, who had taken time out of their Saturday to witness what they believed would be the beginning of my happily ever after. They deserved to know the truth too. I gathered my wedding dress, shoes, and makeup bag, and walked into the cathedral through the side entrance that led to the bridal preparation room. The small space was already bustling with activity. My matron of honor, Catherine, was hanging up her dusty rose dress, and my 2 bridesmaids were setting up a coffee station and arranging the bouquets we'd spent months selecting. "Madison!" Catherine rushed over to hug me, her face glowing with excitement. "Oh my God, you're absolutely radiant. How are you feeling? Are you nervous, excited, ready to become Mrs. Montgomery?" "Like today is going to change everything," I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in days. "Where's your mother?" I thought she'd be here by now, fussing over every last detail. I checked my phone. No new messages from Victoria since her sickeningly sweet good morning texts. "She's probably at home getting ready," I said, knowing exactly where my mother was and what she'd been doing. You know how she likes everything to be absolutely perfect. What I didn't say was that I knew exactly where my mother was because I'd been tracking Alexander's phone since last night using our shared iCloud account, a detail we'd set up for wedding planning that had become my window into their betrayal. He'd spent the night at our family home, leaving at 6:30 this morning, probably, to avoid being seen by neighbors or my father. One last betrayal for old time's sake. One final insult before they both had to pretend to be the loving mother and devoted groom. As my bridesmaids helped me into my dress, I felt strangely calm, like I was putting on armor rather than wedding attire. The ivory silk slipped over my skin like liquid moonlight, and when they fastened the dozens of tiny pearl buttons up my back, I felt myself transforming into someone new, someone stronger, someone who would never again allow herself to be anyone's victim. Paragraph 4. The dress had been my mother's choice, of course. A traditional A-line gown with long sleeves, a cathedral train, and enough beadwork to rival the constellations above Los Angeles. I'd wanted something simpler, more modern, more me, but Victoria had insisted with that smile that never reached her eyes. "This dress will photograph beautifully, darling," she'd said during the fitting. "Classic elegance never goes out of style, and you want to look perfect for posterity." Now I understood why she'd been so invested in how I looked. She needed me to look perfect for the photographs that would document her son-in-law's public humiliation, for the society pages that would cover the scandal she'd created. Catherine pinned my veil in place, the same fingertip-length veil my grandmother had worn decades ago. "You look absolutely stunning, Madison. Alexander is going to lose his mind when he sees you walking down that aisle." "I certainly hope so," I murmured, thinking of all the ways this day would exceed everyone's expectations. At 11:30, the photographer arrived to take pre-ceremony shots, and I smiled and posed, letting him capture what he thought were images of bridal joy, but were actually photos of a woman preparing. "What are we going to do?" he whispered, his hands still shaking as he held the evidence of his wife's betrayal. "We're going to walk down that aisle," I said firmly, my voice carrying a strength I didn't know I possessed. "We're going to let everyone see exactly who Victoria Sterling and Alexander Montgomery really are, and we're going to do it with dignity and truth." "Madison, no. Think about this. The scandal, the humiliation, your reputation, my ministry. The humiliation isn't ours to carry, Dad. It's theirs. Our only responsibility is to the truth." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him grappling with 30 years of conditioning that said family problems should be handled privately, quietly, behind closed doors where appearances could be maintained. "There are 200 people out there," he said, gesturing toward the sanctuary. 200 people who love us and deserve to know the truth before they witness what they think is a sacred ceremony. My voice was gentle but unwavering. "Your reputation will be that you refuse to live a lie, that you chose honesty over comfortable deception." A knock at the door interrupted us. "5 minutes, everyone," called the wedding coordinator, her voice bright with the excitement of someone who had no idea she was about to witness the most spectacular wedding ceremony in Beverly Hills history. Dad stood up slowly, his legs unsteady, and for a moment I was afraid he might collapse right there in his formal tuxedo. but he straightened his shoulders and looked at me with something that might have been pride mixed with devastation. "You're braver than I ever was," he said quietly, his voice filled with wonder and sorrow. "I learned from the best," I replied, squeezing his arm. "You taught me that truth matters more than comfort, that integrity matters more than appearances." He offered me his arm, and together we walked toward the sanctuary doors, past the nervous energy of bridesmaids and the bustling activity of photographers and coordinators who had no idea they were about to document the most memorable wedding ceremony of their careers. Through the glass panels of the sanctuary doors, I could see Sacred Heart Cathedral filled with guests, friends and family members who had traveled from across the country to celebrate with us, the cream of Beverly Hills society dressed in their finest attire. The altar was decorated with white roses and peonies, just as my mother had insisted, creating a picture of perfect elegance and romance. The orchestra was playing Pachelbel's Canon, filling the sacred space with soaring melody that had accompanied countless brides down countless aisles. Alexander stood at the altar in his perfectly tailored Armani tuxedo, looking every inch the successful attorney and devoted bridegroom, his best man and groomsmen flanked beside him, all of them smiling, in anticipation of what they believed would be a celebration of love and commitment. In the front row, my mother sat radiant in her emerald Chanel dress, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief in a performance of maternal emotion that would have won her an Academy Award. She looked like every mother of the bride should look, proud, elegant, overcome with emotion at her daughter's happiness. What incredible actors they both were, I thought, as we prepared to enter the sanctuary. They should have been on Broadway instead of destroying lives in Beverly Hills. The wedding coordinator opened the doors and the processional music began, signaling the start of what everyone believed would be a fairy tale ceremony. My bridesmaids walked down the aisle in their dusty rose dresses, smiling at guests and taking their places at the altar with practiced grace. Then, the music swelled into the bridal march, and every person in that cathedral rose to their feet. 200 pairs of eyes turning toward the doors where I waited with my father. Cameras flashed like paparazzi at a Hollywood premiere. People smiled and whispered about how beautiful I looked, how perfect everything was, how lucky Alexander was to be marrying such a wonderful woman from such a distinguished family. "Ready, sweetheart?" Dad whispered, his arm steady beneath mine, despite everything he'd just learned. "Ready," I said, and we stepped into the sanctuary together. I felt those 200 pairs of eyes turn toward us, felt the collective intake of breath as the congregation took in the sight of the bride in her perfect dress with her perfect veil walking toward her perfect future. Cameras flashed, and people smiled and whispered about how radiant I looked, how this was the society wedding of the year. Alexander's face lit up when he saw me, his blue eyes warm with what looked like genuine love and anticipation. My mother pressed her handkerchief to her eyes, the picture of maternal devotion and joy. What a performance, I thought, as we processed down that long aisle. What an absolutely breathtaking performance they've both been giving for months while destroying everything I believed about love and family and trust. Madison, the officiant turned to me. "Do you take Alexander to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, until death do you part?" This was my moment, the moment to say "I do" and become complicit in my own deception, or the moment to burn their world down with the truth. I looked out at the congregation, all these faces filled with expectation and joy, people who'd traveled hundreds of miles to witness what they thought was the beginning of my happily ever after. I looked at my father in the front row, his eyes encouraging me to be strong and choose truth over comfort. I looked at my mother, still dabbing at her eyes with theatrical emotion, probably already planning her next secret rendezvous with my husband-to-be. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's sound system. "I have something to say first." The cathedral fell into perfect silence. Even the orchestra stopped playing, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. Nathaniel's hand tightened on mine, his smile faltering just slightly as confusion replaced confidence in his expression. "Madison?" The officiant looked puzzled. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect," I said, turning to face the congregation. "I just realized that before I make the biggest promise of my life, I should probably be completely honest. About everything." 200 faces stared back at me, confusion replacing celebration in their expressions as they sensed the shift in atmosphere. I pulled my hand free from Alexander's and stepped slightly away from him, closer to the microphone. In the front row, my mother had gone very still, her handkerchief forgotten in her lap, as some primitive instinct warned her that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," I began, my voice steady and clear. "It means everything to me that you would take time out of your lives to witness what you thought would be the beginning of my happily ever after." Murmurs began to ripple through the congregation like stones thrown into still water. I could see Priya in the back with her camera, discreetly positioned to capture every moment of what was about to become the most talked-about wedding ceremony in Beverly Hills history. But I've learned recently that happy endings are built on truth, not on beautiful lies. And there's something you all need to know before this ceremony continues. Alexander reached for me, panic flickering across his handsome features, but I stepped further away. "Yesterday, I discovered that my fiancé and my mother have been having an affair." The words hit the cathedral like a bomb detonating in a sacred space. Gasps echoed off the stone walls. Someone dropped their program. In the front row, I watched the color drain from Justice Montgomery's face as he stared at his son with horror and disbelief. "I found my mother's journal detailing their relationship," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. 3 months of secret meetings, lies, and betrayals. 3 months of them laughing at how easily they could deceive me while I planned what I thought was the most important day of my life. My mother stood up abruptly, her face flushed with panic and shame. "Madison, stop this nonsense immediately. You don't know what you're talking about." "Sit down, Victoria," came the sharp command from my father, who had also risen from his seat. His voice carried the authority of 30 years of ministry, and my mother sank back into her pew as if she'd been struck by lightning. Alexander was frantically trying to salvage the situation, his legal training kicking in as he attempted. "Damage control. Everyone, please, there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Is it a misunderstanding that you spent last night at my parents' house while my father was at his meeting?" I asked, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Is it a misunderstanding that you've been using our joint credit card to buy expensive gifts for my mother? Gifts that she specifically mentioned loving in her journal entries about your affair?" The cathedral erupted in shocked whispers and gasps as 200 guests tried to process what they were witnessing. Justice Montgomery was standing now, staring at his son with the kind of rage and disappointment that ends careers and destroys families. "Alexander, tell me this isn't true," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a lifetime of reputation and respectability. Alexander looked around the cathedral wildly, seeing his reputation, his career, his entire life crumbling in real time before an audience of everyone who mattered in his world. I can explain," he stammered, but his usual confidence had evaporated like morning mist in the harsh light of truth. "Oh, please do explain," I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. "Explain to your father, to your colleagues, to everyone who believed you were a man of honor, how you seduced your fiancé's mother. Explain how you planned to marry me while continuing your affair with her." The silence was deafening. Every person in that cathedral was staring at Alexander, waiting for his explanation, and he had nothing. No smooth attorney arguments, no charming deflections, just the truth finally exposed in all its ugliness. In the front row, my mother was weeping, not the delicate tears of a proud mother, but harsh, ugly sobs of a woman whose life had just imploded in the most public way possible. "Madison," she choked out, "please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, turning to face her. "I understand that you decided your daughter's happiness was a fair price to pay for feeling desired again." I began walking down the aisle, my cathedral train sweeping behind me like a queen's robe, and with each step I felt lighter, freer, more powerful than I'd ever felt in my life. As I passed the front row, I stopped in front of my father and kissed his forehead, tasting salt and sorrow but also feeling his strength supporting me. "I love you, Dad. You did nothing wrong." Behind me, chaos was erupting as Alexander tried to explain himself to his furious father while guests stood and whispered and pointed. My mother was sobbing into her hands while Mrs. Chen from the floral committee stared at her with undisguised disgust. But I didn't look back. I walked through those cathedral doors with my head held high, my wedding dress flowing behind me like a river of ivory silk, feeling more beautiful and powerful than I'd ever felt in my life. The parking lot behind Sacred Heart Cathedral was my sanctuary, and I stood beside my car breathing in the crisp October air, feeling like I could finally breathe freely for the first time in months. Alexander looked into my eyes, his voice strong and clear as he lied to God and 200 witnesses. "I do." 1 year later, I stood at the podium in the Beverly Hills Hotel's grand ballroom, looking out at 300 faces, writers, publishers, readers, and survivors who had gathered for the National Women's Empowerment Conference. The nameplate in front of me read, "Madison Sterling, Keynote Speaker, The Power of Choosing Yourself." A year ago, I began, my voice carrying easily through the sound system. I stood at an altar in front of 200 people and made a choice that changed everything. Not the choice everyone expected me to make, but the choice that honored who I really am. In the audience, I could see women nodding, leaning forward in their seats, recognizing something of themselves in my story. My speech had become a touchstone for many, not because of the drama or the revenge, but because of the deeper truth it represented about choosing authenticity over approval. Within hours of my cathedral confrontation, the story was spreading, like wildfire through Beverly Hills social circles and beyond. Within days, Knockord Wedding Revenge was trending on social media as people shared Priya's video and dissected every moment of my public stand for truth. Justice Montgomery issued a statement through his chambers announcing that his son was taking indefinite leave to address personal matters. Translation: Alexander's legal career was effectively over. No prestigious law firm in California would touch him after such a public scandal. My mother's fall from social grace was swift and brutal. Within a week, she'd been quietly asked to step down from her positions on 3 different charity boards. Her lunch invitations dried up, her phone stopped ringing, and Victoria Sterling, who had built her identity on being the perfect minister's wife, found herself the subject of whispered conversations and shocked stares wherever she went in Beverly Hills. The most satisfying response came from my father's congregation, who rallied around him in a way that restored my faith in human decency. Rather than blame him for his wife's actions, they saw him as a victim of betrayal and offered their unwavering support. He chose to step down from his position anyway, accepting an offer to serve as interim pastor at a small church in Northern California, where he could heal and rebuild away from the wreckage of his marriage. "I can't preach about the sanctity of marriage when my own wife made a mockery of it," he told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "But maybe I can learn to preach about forgiveness and starting over." He filed for divorce within a month, and Victoria moved to her sister's house in Phoenix, the only family member who would still speak to her. As for me, I was offered a position as executive editor at a prestigious publishing house in New York, with a salary that was $130,000 more than what I'd been making in Los Angeles. The company's CEO, a woman who'd built her empire after leaving her own cheating husband, specifically recruited me because she admired what she called my uncompromising integrity. I took the job and never looked back. New York became my sanctuary, a place where I could walk down the street and just be Madison, not that woman from the wedding video. I found an apartment in Manhattan Beach with a small garden where I grew wildflowers, the kind I'd originally wanted for my wedding bouquet. Every morning, I looked at those natural, uncontrolled blooms and remembered that beauty doesn't have to be perfect to be real. 6 months after my non-wedding, I received an unexpected letter from Eleanor Montgomery, Alexander's mother. "Dear Madison," it began in elegant handwriting, "I cannot begin to express my horror at my son's behavior or my admiration for your courage that day. You deserved so much better than the betrayal our family caused you. Please know that you will always have my respect and my gratitude for showing us who our son really was before it was too late to protect others from him." She included a check for $84,500, the exact cost of my engagement ring, which I had returned the day after the wedding. "Consider this an investment in your new beginning," the letter concluded. "I donated every penny to a foundation that helped women leave abusive relationships, knowing that financial independence was often the key to freedom." I never heard from my mother directly, though she tried to reach out through intermediaries, my aunt, old family friends, even my former colleagues at Sterling Literary House. But I'd made it clear that I had nothing to say to her. Some betrayals are too profound for simple forgiveness, especially the kind of cheap forgiveness that pretends nothing happened. Maybe someday I'll be able to have a conversation with Victoria, but that day hasn't come yet, and I'm okay with that uncertainty. Healing doesn't require reconciliation with people who've shown they're capable of destroying you for their own pleasure. Over the past year, I've connected with thousands of women who've found the courage to leave toxic relationships, to speak truth to power, to choose their own happiness over other people's comfort. As I concluded my speech that day in Beverly Hills, looking out at an audience of survivors and warriors, I raised my glass of champagne in a toast. "Here's to everyone who chooses freedom over beautiful prisons," I said. "Here's to those who speak truth when lies would be easier. Here's to the women who walk away from happily ever after when it's built on someone else's foundation." The applause was thunderous, and after my speech, dozens of women approached me to share their own stories of choosing courage over silence. That night, I sat in my hotel room overlooking the city where I'd been born and raised, scrolling through messages from women who'd watched my speech online. Their words were variations on the same theme. "Thank you for showing me it was possible. Thank you for choosing truth. Thank you for refusing to be silent." Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's liberation. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is choose herself when everyone else expects her to choose silence. And sometimes the best happily ever after isn't the one you planned, but the one you create when you finally learn to value your own truth above everyone else's comfort. If this story of choosing courage over silence inspired you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our epic tales of justice and redemption. Like this video if you believe in the power of truth over comfort, and share it with anyone who needs to hear that. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's fool. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love connecting with our global family of survivors and warriors. Until next time, remember, you are worth more than other people's lies, and you have the power to choose yourself when everyone else expects you to stay silent.